Silence is often misunderstood, especially in moments when someone you cared about begins to pull away. The natural human reaction is to chase, to question, to explain, to fix. But these impulses rarely come from a place of strength. They come from fear. Fear of losing the connection, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being replaced. Yet the moment you choose silence, real silence, not the silence of suppression, but the silence of self-respect, everything shifts. You begin to realign with your inner power, because silence is not the absence of words, it is the presence of self-control. It is the refusal to allow someone else's emotional chaos or inconsistency to dictate your peace. When he chooses distance, you are being presented with one of life's greatest tests. Will you abandon yourself to hold on to someone who isn't choosing you? Or will you stand still in your own worth long enough to let the truth come forward? Most people never truly understand how powerful silence is until they use it. Silence is not passive. It is not weakness. It is strength wrapped in calmness. It is the quiet declaration that you will not negotiate your value, not even in the face of rejection or uncertainty. Many people believe that speaking, explaining, proving, or persuading will give them control, but the truth is the opposite. Every word spoken from desperation gives your power away. Every message you send trying to fix the distance takes strength from your spirit. Silence is where you reclaim that strength. Silence is where you step out of emotional reaction and into emotional mastery. And emotional mastery is the birthplace of confidence, clarity, and self-respect. When you choose silence instead of chasing, you send a message without delivering a single word. You communicate that your self-worth does not depend on external validation. You communicate that you will not compete for someone's attention. You communicate that your heart is valuable and access to it must be earned. Silence doesn't beg. Silence doesn't bargain. Silence doesn't bend. Silence stands tall. And in doing so, it commands more respect than any argument ever could. Because when a person pulls away and you do not run after them, they begin to feel the weight of their own actions. They begin to question their own behavior. They begin to realize that the world does not stop spinning simply because they chose distance. Your silence becomes the mirror they cannot avoid. And something powerful happens to you in that silence. You begin to hear yourself again. The noise of emotional panic fades, and the voice of your intuition becomes clear. You start to see the situation for what it is, not what you hoped it would be. Silence reconnects you to the truth, because truth is never loud. Truth whispers. It speaks in the quiet moments, in the spaces between your thoughts, in the calmness of your breath. When you silence the urge to respond, you create space for understanding. You create space for healing. You create space for the right people to move closer and the wrong people to drift away. Silence also shows you where your boundaries truly lie. It reveals how much you were giving just to be noticed, how much you were trying just to hold on, how much of yourself you were sacrificing just to keep the connection alive. When you stop speaking, you begin observing. When you stop reaching out, you begin realizing. And when you stop trying to change the situation, you begin changing yourself. In silence, you reclaim the parts of you that you gave away too easily. You rediscover the strength that was buried under your fears. You remember that you existed before him and you will exist after him, and your worth was never diminished by someone else's temporary withdrawal. The beauty of silence is that it transforms you. It shifts your energy from seeking to receiving, from needing to knowing. You stop seeking answers from someone who is unwilling to give them, and you begin receiving clarity from within. You stop needing reassurance from someone whose attention is inconsistent, and you begin knowing that your value is constant, regardless of who sees it. Silence teaches you patience, resilience, emotional discipline. It teaches you that the person who pulls away is responsible for their own choices, and you are responsible for how you respond to those choices. Your silence becomes your shield. It protects your dignity, your peace, your emotional balance. It stops you from giving more than you receive. It stops you from investing where consistency is lacking. It stops you from shrinking yourself just to be tolerated in someone else's life. When you give silence instead of reaction, you show yourself that you are capable of choosing you, and choosing you is the highest form of inner power. Silence becomes the space where you rebuild. It becomes the ground where you plant new standards. It becomes the foundation upon which you rise stronger, clearer, and more confident than before. Through silence, you learn that your voice is valuable, but it does not need to be used to prove anything to anyone who cannot see your worth. Silence is the moment you stand still long enough to witness your own strength unfolding. And once you feel that strength, once you taste that power, you realize you never needed to chase anyone to feel whole. Distance has a way of revealing truths that remain hidden when emotions are running high and the connection feels close. When someone is in your life consistently, when they're speaking to you, calling you, showing up for you, it's easy to romanticize their intentions. It's easy to overlook red flags, ignore inconsistencies, or justify behaviors that don't align with what you deserve. But when a person chooses distance, when their presence starts fading, when their effort becomes minimal or inconsistent, the fog lifts. You begin to see clearly, not because you wanted the distance, but because the distance forces reality into focus. The heart sees what it wants to see, but distance shows you what is truly there. And in those quiet gaps, you start to understand the truth that closeness was hiding. Distance is not always a punishment. Sometimes it is a revelation. It reveals what a person feels when they are no longer performing or trying to impress. It shows you how they act when they are comfortable, when they are unfiltered, when they have nothing to gain. Anyone can give attention when it's convenient. Anyone can show interest when it benefits them. But distance exposes the real story. It reveals whether the connection was genuine or temporary, whether the person valued you or simply enjoyed the idea of you, whether they were truly invested or just passing time. Distance removes the distractions, the excuses, the emotional noise. It separates intention from illusion. And when you stop trying to fill the silence with explanations, you allow the truth to rise on its own. When he chooses distance, what he does next becomes louder than anything he could ever say. The calls that don't come, the messages that remain unsent, the plans that never happen, these become answers. Answers you didn't want but needed. People often reveal their priorities through their absence, not their presence. Because presence can be imitated, acted out, forced. Absence cannot. It is the most honest language a person speaks. When someone chooses distance, they show you exactly where you stand without having to explain it in words. And while that truth may sting, it is clarity. A clarity you deserve, even if you never asked for it. Distance also reveals you to yourself. It exposes what you tolerate, what you fear losing, and what you cling to, even when it hurts. It shows you the parts of yourself that still need healing. It shows you where your boundaries need strengthening. It shows you how quickly you reach for reassurance when someone pulls away. It reveals the emotional patterns that keep you attached to people who don't show the same level of care or consistency. In a way, his distance becomes a mirror reflecting your own inner world. You begin to see not only who he is, but who you have been becoming in his presence. Strong or needy, grounded or insecure, valued or overlooked. The truth isn't just about him, it's about you too. Distance breaks the illusion of control. When someone is distant, you cannot force closeness. You cannot talk them into caring. You cannot pull them into showing up. Distance strips away every attempt to manage the relationship and leaves you with one choice: acceptance. And acceptance is not defeat. Acceptance is strength. It is the recognition that you cannot build a connection alone. It is the understanding that if the bond was real, if his intentions were genuine, if his interest was sincere, distance would never become the default. People don't distance themselves from what they are afraid to lose. They distance themselves from what they take for granted. And when you see that clearly, you stop begging for clarity and start embracing the clarity that distance provides. In the quiet moments created by someone else's withdrawal, you start noticing patterns that were previously invisible. You begin to question why you were always the one initiating conversations, making plans, fixing misunderstandings, keeping the connection alive. You start to realize how much energy you poured into a relationship that may not have been pouring back into you. The truths that distance reveals are often uncomfortable, but they are transformative. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Once you understand the reality behind someone's distance, you stop trying to rewrite the story. You stop making excuses. You stop holding on to potential and start acknowledging patterns. Distance is not just physical or emotional space. It is insight. It gives you the vantage point to see the full picture. It gives you the clarity to decide whether this is the connection you truly want or whether you have been forcing something that was never meant to grow. When he chooses distance, he is revealing something: his priorities, his intentions, his emotional capacity. And your silence in response allows these truths to surface without interference. You see what stays, what disappears, what fades, and what fights to return. You see who he becomes when you stop giving. You see what the relationship means to him when effort is no longer mutual. And through that vision, through that unfiltered clarity, you gain the strength to choose what aligns with your worth rather than what aligns with your fears. Distance is not always the loss it feels like. Sometimes it is the clarity you were avoiding. Sometimes it is the truth you needed to grow. Sometimes it is the reality that sets you free. Your worth is not something that rises and falls according to someone else's recognition. It is not determined by how much attention a person gives you, how quickly they respond, how often they show up, or whether they stay consistent. Yet when someone begins to pull away, when their behavior shifts, when their presence becomes uncertain, it's easy to fall into the trap of questioning yourself. You start wondering if you said something wrong, if you weren't enough, if you should have done more, given more, tried harder. But this kind of self-blame is a reflection of fear, not truth. The truth is simple. Someone else's inability to appreciate you does not reduce your value. It only reveals their limitations. It shows you the level at which they operate, the emotional capacity they have, and the choices they make, not who you are. It's human nature to internalize rejection. The mind tries to make sense of the disconnect by turning inward, searching for flaws. But what you must understand is that your worth is intrinsic. It exists with or without validation. It was there before anyone entered your life, and it remains even when someone leaves. No person, no relationship, no temporary withdrawal has the authority to diminish it. When he chooses distance, it's easy to feel unwanted, but feeling unwanted does not mean you are unworthy. It means someone failed to see your value clearly, and that is not your burden to carry. That is their blind spot, not your deficit. When a person pulls away, it often says more about their emotional maturity than your desirability. Some people are intimidated by consistency, honesty, or vulnerability. Some are not ready for depth. Some cannot handle a person who knows their own value. Distance is sometimes a coping mechanism for those who don't know how to deal with real connection. And when you attach your worth to their behavior, you are giving them a power they were never meant to hold. You are allowing someone else's emotional instability to shape your self-perception. That is how you shrink yourself. That is how you dim your light. But your worth is far too powerful, too complex, too sacred to be determined by someone who doesn't understand how to appreciate it. Your value must come from within. It must come from the depth of your heart, the integrity of your character, the strength you carry, the loyalty you give, the love you offer. These are qualities that cannot be measured by someone else's temporary actions. They cannot be reduced by silence or distance. You are not worthy only when someone pays attention to you, and unworthy when they don't. You are not valuable only when someone wants you, and disposable when they don't. You are not meant to question your existence based on someone's inconsistent behavior. When someone fails to appreciate what you bring, that loss does not fall on you. It falls on them. What often hurts the most is that distance feels personal. It feels like a rejection of who you are, rather than a reflection of where the other person is in their own emotional journey. But people can pull away for reasons that have nothing to do with you. Fear, insecurity, confusion, emotional immaturity, past trauma, or the inability to sustain intimacy. Yet the human heart tends to take responsibility for things it did not cause. That is why silence and distance cut deep. But when you remind yourself that your worth is constant, unchanging, unshakable, you stop trying to explain someone else's behavior through the lens of your own imperfections. You cannot make someone see your worth. You cannot force appreciation, loyalty, or effort. You cannot convince someone to value you by giving more of yourself. The more you try to prove your worth to someone who doesn't recognize it, the more you disconnect from your own self-respect. Your worth is not something to be proven, it is something to be lived. It is reflected in how you treat yourself, how you set boundaries, how you walk away from situations that diminish you. When he chooses distance, your response should not be to shrink, but to stand tall, to remind yourself that you do not need to chase validation from someone whose vision is too limited to see your depth. The person who truly values you will not create distance without communication. They will not make you question yourself. They will not make you feel replaceable. They will not make you feel like you need to fight for a place in their life. You don't lose your worth because someone is too distracted, too confused, or too unhealed to appreciate it. You do not become less simply because they fail to recognize more. Someone walking away does not decrease your value, it simply decreases their access to you. When you anchor your worth within yourself, distance no longer defines you. Silence no longer scares you. Someone pulling away no longer shakes your identity. You begin to understand that you were whole before them and you remain whole without them. Your worth is not situational. It is not dependent on someone's attention, affection, or consistency. It is woven into your existence. It's in your resilience, your empathy, your ability to care deeply, your capacity to love, your inner strength. Someone else failing to value that does not make you less. It simply makes them unworthy of the space they once occupied. The moment you realize this, the moment you see your worth as something untouchable and independent of external validation, you stop begging for attention. You stop chasing after clarity. You stop trying to earn what should be freely given. You begin to understand that your value is not diminished by someone leaving, it is revealed by your ability to stand strong when they do. When someone pulls away from you, when their energy shifts, when their presence becomes inconsistent, the instinct to react is strong. You want to reach out, fix things, seek answers, calm the anxiety that rises in the silence. But every message typed out of fear, every call made out of panic, every attempt to pull them back drains your energy. It pulls you further away from your center. It makes you feel dependent on their response for your emotional balance. That is why withdrawing your energy and giving silence is not just a response, it is a reclamation. It is the moment you stop handing over pieces of yourself to someone who is not meeting you with the same level of effort. It is the moment your energy stops leaking out through worry, overthinking, and emotional chasing, and starts returning to you as clarity and confidence. When you choose silence, you begin to gather yourself again. You stop scattering your power across unanswered messages and unreciprocated effort. Instead of trying to reach someone who is choosing distance, you reach inward. You reconnect with the part of you that knows your worth, the part that remembers your strength, the part that refuses to beg for the bare minimum. Silence becomes a container, a sacred space where you heal, reflect, and grow. You begin to see how much of yourself you had been giving without question. You notice the emotional exhaustion that was building quietly underneath the surface. And as your energy returns, so does your clarity. You start understanding what the situation truly is, not what you hoped it would be. Pulling back your energy doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop depleting yourself. It means you stop pouring into someone who has stopped pouring into you. It means you step back long enough to evaluate whether this connection is aligned with your growth or holding you back from it. When you're constantly reacting to someone's inconsistency, you lose your emotional grounding. You start basing your mood, your confidence, your sense of security on how they treat you, and that kind of dependence slowly chips away at your self-esteem. But silence reverses that. Silence reminds you that your inner world belongs to you, not to anyone else's behavior. Silence teaches you emotional regulation because you begin to respond to your own needs, not his absence. As you pull back your energy, the fog begins to lift. You start noticing that you feel less anxious, less desperate for validation, less attached to someone who isn't choosing you with the same intensity. Your mind becomes clearer because you're no longer obsessing over what he's thinking or doing. You stop imagining scenarios. You stop replaying conversations. You stop trying to decode mixed signals. Instead, you start focusing on your own peace. Your energy, once tied to uncertainty, becomes anchored within you. And anchored energy is powerful energy. It gives you the strength to make decisions from clarity, not emotion. Distance reveals what you couldn't see up close, but silence gives you the strength to process it. When you stop chasing someone who is distancing themselves, something inside you shifts. You begin to understand your own patterns. You see where you have been overgiving. You see how quickly you were willing to compromise your boundaries just to keep the connection intact. And as your energy gathers, you begin to realize that you don't want to be in a relationship where you have to fight for presence, attention, or consistency. You want a connection that feels natural, mutual, steady. Silence helps you remember that. The more your energy returns, the stronger your standards become. You stop trying to convince someone to choose you. You stop explaining your worth to someone who hasn't earned the privilege of your vulnerability. You stop bending yourself into shapes just to fit into their life. Your confidence begins to rebuild, not because he came back, not because he explained himself, but because you chose yourself. Because you chose to stop leaking your power into a situation that drained you. And in that space, clarity naturally rises. You begin to see where the connection was one-sided. You begin to see where you were tolerating behaviors that did not honor your value. You begin to see that someone distancing themselves is not a reason to chase, it is a reason to pause and reflect. Silence also shifts the dynamic. When you stop trying to close the distance, he is left alone with the space he created. He begins to feel the absence of your energy. He begins to notice the silence that once was filled with your effort. He may not have realized how much you gave until you stopped giving. But this shift is not about manipulating him or waiting for him to return. It's about restoring your power. When you reclaim your energy, you send a message that is stronger than any conversation. You are not someone who is available on demand. You are not someone who will chase after inconsistency. You are someone who respects yourself enough to walk away from emotional imbalance. Pulling back your energy brings you home to yourself. It gives you the strength to choose peace over confusion, dignity over desperation, clarity over chaos. And as your confidence rises, you begin to see the situation not as a loss, but as liberation. You start moving from reaction to reflection, from seeking validation to owning your value, from emotional dependence to emotional independence. And in that shift, your power returns to you fully, reminding you that no one has the right to drain your spirit unless you hand them the permission to do so. Silence is often misunderstood because people assume it means indifference, weakness, or defeat, but silence is far more powerful than noise. Silence is a mirror, and the moment you choose to say nothing, you create a space where truth can no longer hide. When someone pulls away, when their messages slow down, when their effort drops, the instinct is to speak up, to ask questions, to demand clarity. But every time you fill the space with words, you interrupt the truth that would have revealed itself on its own. Silence forces the situation to speak. Silence forces the other person to face what they have been avoiding. Silence becomes the echo that returns their own behavior back to them. When you stop responding, when you stop over-explaining, when you stop chasing answers, the dynamic shifts. He is no longer reacting to your emotions, he is confronting his own. And that is where silence becomes a powerful mirror. It shows him what he truly feels in your absence. If his interest was genuine, silence will make him uncomfortable. It will make him question why he pulled away. It will make him realize what he misses, what he risks losing, what he took for granted. People often don't recognize the value of consistency until it's gone. They don't realize how much they relied on your presence, your effort, your emotional support until the silence removes it. Silence removes your energy from their life, and when your energy has value, they feel the void. It is not the silence that makes someone reflected. It's the loss of access to your warmth, your kindness, your attention. Silence brings that loss into focus. It forces them to confront what life looks like without you filling every gap, without you soothing every tension, without you reaching out first. Silence shows them the difference between convenience and connection. And if their feelings were real, silence is the space where realization begins. But silence doesn't only reveal his truth, it reveals your own. When you stop talking, you start observing. When you stop trying to save the connection, you start seeing it clearly. Without the noise of emotional reaction, you begin to understand what you were truly receiving and what you were convincing yourself to accept. You see, whether he reaches out, whether he notices your absence, whether he cares enough to close the gap he created, silence shows you the answers you were searching for, not through words, but through action or lack of it. You begin to see how much you were giving, how much he wasn't giving back, and how much emotional labor you were carrying on your own. Silence also reveals patterns you couldn't see when you were emotionally invested. It shows you whether he only returns when he needs something or whether he comes back out of genuine care. It shows you if he values your presence or only values your convenience. Silence is the filter that separates intention from habit, love from attachment, interest from temporary attention. It reveals whether he misses you or just misses the benefits of having you. When you take your voice away, you take away the comfort he took for granted. And in that absence, his intentions become clearer than any conversation could ever make them. And while silence makes him face his truth, it also empowers you to face yours. You start seeing how you respond to space, how strong you really are when you stop chasing, and how much peace you gain when you stop trying to control outcomes. Silence is a mirror that reflects your growth back to you. It shows you where you were seeking validation, where you were afraid of losing someone, where you were placing your worth in the wrong hands. It teaches you to regulate your own emotions. It teaches you to trust yourself again. It teaches you that you don't need to raise your voice to raise your standards. Silence is also a boundary. It is the line you draw between effort and over-effort, between giving and over-giving, between being available and being taken for granted. You show the other person that access to you is not guaranteed, that your presence is not a privilege they can misuse. Silence commands respect, not because it is loud, but because it is unwavering. You aren't punishing or manipulating, you are simply refusing to participate in dynamics that drain you. You are stepping back and allowing truth to emerge naturally. And while silence reflects his behavior back to him, it also reflects your self-worth back to you. You begin to realize that the right person won't be confused by silence. The right person won't be comfortable with distance. The right person won't be at peace when you stop speaking. Silence shows you whether he steps forward or disappears entirely. It shows you whether he values you enough to confront the distance or whether he was only there because you made it easy. In this sense, silence doesn't break a connection, it exposes it. People can make promises, speak beautifully, express interest, and show affection, but silence reveals what they do when the convenience disappears. It reveals whether the connection was genuine or temporary. It reveals whether he is willing to fight for you or whether he simply fades away. Silence is the truth teller, the great divider, the invisible test that requires no words. It shows you everything you need to know, not through explanations, but through behavior. And in that revelation, you gain clarity, strength, and the confidence to choose what aligns with your worth rather than what aligns with your fears. Losing someone is never easy, but what hurts even more is losing the illusion you built around them. When he chooses distance and you respond with silence, something profound happens. You stop clinging to who you thought he was and start seeing who he actually is. Silence becomes the light that dissolves fantasy. It shows you whether the connection was real or simply fueled by hope, emotion, or potential. You begin to realize that you are not losing a person, you are losing the story you told yourself about that person. And sometimes that loss is exactly what sets you free, because the people who are truly meant for you will not be driven away by silence. They will not be threatened by your boundaries. They will not retreat when things get real. They will not disappear when you stop overgiving. Silence does not scare the right person. It exposes the wrong one. When someone pulls away and you choose not to chase, you give the connection the opportunity to reveal its truth. If the bond was fragile, silence will break it. If the bond was genuine, silence will strengthen it. The right person will feel the absence of your energy and return with clarity, not confusion. But the wrong person will let the silence stretch infinitely because their investment was never deep enough to begin with. Silence reveals which category he belongs to. It shows you whether he steps forward when you step back, whether he cares enough to close the distance, whether he values you enough to reestablish connection without being pushed. And this is the part many people fear, discovering that someone they cared for was never truly aligned with them. But this truth is not a loss, it is liberation. Because holding on to the wrong person only blocks the right person from ever entering your life. Silence removes illusions. It removes projections. It removes wishful thinking. It shows you that some people were only meant to be a lesson, not a lifetime. They were meant to teach you about boundaries, self-respect, emotional balance, and the power of walking away even when you care. Losing the illusion helps you reclaim your strength. You stop waiting for someone who was never ready. You stop trying to change someone who was never willing. You stop giving love to someone who could not receive it fully. Silence also teaches you about what you deserve. When he stays distant, when he does nothing to fix the space he created, when he allows silence to grow instead of bridge it, you begin to understand that you deserve someone who chooses you without hesitation, someone who doesn't run at the first sign of depth, someone who communicates instead of disappearing, someone who values connection instead of avoiding it. Silence becomes the filter that separates temporary people from permanent ones. It becomes the test that reveals the difference between a person who sees your worth and a person who overlooks it. And while silence reveals his truth, it also reveals your inner strength. You begin to see that you can survive without constant reassurance. You can thrive without chasing someone's attention. You can remain calm, grounded, and centered, even when someone else pulls away. This emotional independence is one of the greatest gifts silence offers. You realize that you were never afraid of losing him. You were afraid of facing the truth that he was not what you needed. Silence forces you to confront that truth. And in facing it, you grow. You become stronger, wiser, more selective, more protective of your heart. What many don't realize is that silence is not a punishment, it's a boundary. It's a declaration that you will not fight for someone who is not fighting for you. It's the moment you stop trying to prove your worth and allow his actions to prove his intentions. If he wants to be in your life, he will make space. If he wants to communicate, he will reach out. If he wants to repair the connection, he will take the first step. Silence gives him the room to show you that. And if he does nothing, if he remains distant, if he drifts further away, then silence has done its job. It has shown you the truth you needed to accept. You don't lose someone by giving silence. you lose the illusion that they were meant for you. And that loss is necessary because illusions keep you stuck. They keep you chasing potential instead of seeing reality. They keep you waiting for change instead of choosing alignment. When the illusion falls away, what remains is clarity. You finally see where you stand. You finally understand what you deserve. You finally recognize the difference between someone who is meant to be in your life and someone who was simply passing through. And in that moment, silence becomes your greatest ally, not because it saved the connection, but because it saved you from staying in a connection that was never meant to grow in the first place.